Somebody's always.
I grabbed the water on the way out, so yeah, I got 2 items.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm your lunchtime entertainment for today.
Awesome.
It may have been that you paid $10 for a sandwich, depending upon how you feel about the material that's being shared. But at least you get the sandwich for your $10. So my name is Peter Moran, and I live and work in Green Bay. And I'll tell you more about me in a bit. But so in Sunday's paper, Sunday Press Gazette. So it was so recent that I didn't even get the time to give it to Stacy to put on the PowerPoint. There was a, I don't know if any of you read Dilbert at all. For those of you with organizations, it might be good training to keep in touch with Dilbert here. So the one on Sunday, if you didn't happen to see it, so Dilbert's sitting at his desk, and he mentions to a coworker, "I'm panicked about my presentation tomorrow." And the coworker says, "Relax. What's the worst thing that could happen?" Dilbert says, "Well, you know, I could embarrass myself in a career-ending way." "Oh, I didn't think of that. It might be so bad that you can't even get a recommendation for a future job. Then you'd have an emotional meltdown followed by substance abuse, untreated health issues, and a lonely death." So this is still the coworker. "And it could all happen because of something as trivial as a typo on one of your slides."
Been there.
And as Dilbert's walking away, kind of looking like really death-warmed over, the coworker says, "I guess I can add comforting to my list of things that I'm not good at." So I just thought that was kind of relevant. The other thing that's relevant is the Holy Bible. Not to try to proselytize anybody, but there's a number of different things in the Bible, 3 different verses that talk about a person being a prophet in their hometown or in their home country and all this kind of good stuff. And that really does apply because I was born at Holy Family Hospital. I graduated from St. Andrew's Grade School. I graduated from Lincoln High School. I went to the Extension for 2 years. So here I am, coming from the big city of Green Bay, getting to come back to Manitowoc. So now I have an opportunity to find if I can be a prophet in my hometown. So we'll see how that whole thing goes. As far as my background, so for the last 10 years, I've been with Aurora's Employee Assistance Program. Well, let me backtrack even further. So regarding our topic matter, and I see that Stacy was kind enough to give everybody the handouts and stuff. So our topic matter being depression, stress, and then a little bit on employee assistance kind of stuff for anybody that's at all interested in it. So just to kind of share the background, so in the 70s, I worked inpatient at Brown County Mental Health Center in Green Bay. So I dealt with lots and lots of very severely depressed and stressed and people having lots of problems. In the 80s, I worked at the Crisis Intervention Center in Brown County. And again, in that setting, just tons and tons of stress and depression and stuff. Into the 90s and beyond, I've been doing the employee assistance work. So in that role, probably 10 to 20% of the people that I see are coming because of depression issues. And I would have to estimate that probably 50% of the people I see are coming to a large extent regarding stress management. And I actually talk about stress management with them. So that's the kind of background that I have. So I'm kind of curious with the stuff that I brought along. So if people could kind of just quickly go around the room and indicate whatever it may be. So which of those areas in particular would be of interest? If I could ask you to start, Diane.
I am HR at Lowe's and deal with stress and depression and stuff pretty much every day. So.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
I'm Betsy Fair. I'm a registered nurse at KI and actually Lakeside Foods as well. And so I deal with a lot of employees, all sorts of different issues. So just thought, it's always good to know about stress management.
Actually, one of the things I was mentioning to Stacy, and kind of why I wanted to get rolling as soon as possible, is I have the PowerPoint presentation, and it kind of starts out with the obligatory statistical kind of a boring kind of stuff. Then it gets a little bit more lively because it starts to talk about workplace kind of stuff, okay? And it also talks about things companies can do and what individuals can do and all that kind of good stuff. The piece I wanted to make sure that we had time for was specific to individual stress management. As I said, so about 50% of the clients I see, the focus is on stress management. So, but in those presentations, the stress management ones are always really easy to do because all I do is grab my pile of folders that I use with clients and I go out and talk with people and use those handouts. So assuming that I can buzz through the PowerPoint presentation pretty quickly, the last part of the presentation will be specific to your own stress management, which certainly can have some application to your workforce too, but it really is focusing in on you people here today and where you're at regarding healthy, positive coping skills. So that kind of gives the big broad. And so again, interest area?
Judy Check, employee health nurse at Holy County Memorial.
Oh, so I was born at your hospital.
Yes.
Actually, I worked there for several years in the kitchen.
Probably when I was there. I've been there for 37
Oh, okay.
years.
That goes back long ways.
And I'm just always looking for opportunities to increase my knowledge based on topics that are applicable to my practice. So.
Stacy, why are you here?
I'm Stacy from the Chamber, and I'm here not only as a staff member of the Chamber, but also because dealing with a small staff that we have in our office, sometimes there's stressful times when you're doing big things for lots of companies and lots of people with a small amount of people, and I'd like to learn how to manage stress more effectively. I think everyone can benefit from that. So it's a topic that's interesting to me.
And that's a good point. One of the things that we'll do is I'll have you do a quiz, and actually that quiz gives you quick feedback on where you're already at without the additional stuff that I'll be sharing. Right from the get-go, it shows you've already got some really good positive coping skills, or maybe they're not so good and you really want to pay attention to the rest of the presentation because you might pick up something new that'll be really applicable.
Judy Goodchild, Two Rivers Parks and Rec. I'm basically stressed because staff has been reduced drastically. We're expected to do more, and the rumblings are out there at budget time that there will be less dollars, so it's getting a little tense.
I hear you.
Michael Schumacher from Valder Stone and Marble, and I really came because I wanted to learn about it more personally, I guess, for myself. And our associates are very important to me, and I want to be able to recognize these sort of things in myself so that I could be a better leader for them. And I have a lot of individuals that like to come into my office and shut the door and kind of dump things, which is great to be viewed of as a person like that, but at the same time, I need to be able to effectively use those tools to help them as well. And a number of our associates actually take advantage of the EAP program, and we've experienced
Oh, so
great
you folks have an EAP in place?
That's correct.
Great.
So we've experienced some great success with that. So it's been really beneficial for our organization.
Thank you.
Hey there, Carrie Penovich, administration at the hospital, Aurora Hospital here. It's been a little while since we've seen each other. I always like to pick up on the tips and tricks. I do a lot of coaching in my role. As a matter of fact, yesterday I mentioned EAP to an employee. So I think, any information I can get
of deadlines and long hours, and so I'd like to be better educated during those really stressful times of year. But our business is pretty stress related year round, so maybe even some of those other when they're not obvious stressful times when people are going through things. And for myself, because I have to admit I don't always handle the stress the best myself. So,
and part of the stuff that I bring along to share, it really doesn't spend a lot of time talking about specifically where the stress might be coming from. You know, whether it's the actual job duties or the workforce that's there. The assumption is that in this day and age, it's just not realistic that anybody's living a completely stress-free existence. So it's not a question of whether you have stress, it's more of an issue of how much do you have at the present time. If you don't have a lot of stress, then there's really not as much of a need for that range of positive coping skills to stay in balance. You know, you just need a couple of good ones because you don't have a lot of stress right now. But if you have a ton of stress going on, then you really, ideally, you'll have a wide range of positive coping skills so that you can stay in balance regardless of how much you have. So we don't spend a lot of time talking about where it comes from, but more how to deal with it.
My name is Brooke Spring, and I work for Investors Community Bank. I work in HR, but I'm also on our wellness team. And beyond offering our employees the tips on weight loss and healthy eating, we also like to provide tips on being, less stressed and just total healthiness, for well-being and such. So.
And again, I kind of badmouth the statistical part of it, but a lot of the statistics really tie in that connection between physical health and how a person's doing with stress management, and physical health and depression and all that kind of stuff is just so interrelated.
Linda Alexander with Aurora Occupational Health. Majority of my position is workers' compensation, case management. So we're always working with employees, patients, I should say, employee patients. That are oftentimes struggling to get through their injuries. So a lot of times we see a lot of depressed and or stressed out patients. Again, anything I can, any information I can get from you would be great to use.
So with some of you being here from Aurora, so you definitely have to plug the Aurora Employee Assistance Program. Preaching to the choir here. Last but not least.
Brenda Pulley, I'm with Human Resources at Aurora. Okay. So I'm here kind of twofold. I spoke with Peter recently on the phone and about a caregiver situation, and I wanted to meet you so that next time I call you, I know what he's doing.
Wow, this is as good as it gets, Brenda.
And then the other thing is like Carrie, I see a lot of people on a daily basis and do a lot of coaching and mentoring, and I'm just trying to pick up a little bit of information.
So it'll be interesting, if whenever you go to a presentation, if you can walk out the door with a couple of new things, that's great and wonderful. So we'll see if we can add to some of the, it sounds like a lot of you have got a fairly good background and experience in dealing with stressful situations and people that are dealing with difficult kinds of things. So we'll see, hopefully the stuff I bring will maybe package it a little bit different and maybe have some new stuff in there for you. Okay, so without further ado, we will start rolling. And I really appreciate all of your help, Stacy. In doing presentations, as I was starting to say about the audio-visual always being the most challenging part of my presentations, because I'm about as computer literate as...
Click on the one to the right.
Oh, okay. Who would have thought?
There you go.
Wow. Okay. See, I would have just kept pushing that topic until it worked. Oh man. So like I said, the audio-visual is my most challenging stressor. Okay, so when I see people, I don't talk very fast. When I do presentations and I'm trying to get through part of it I tend to talk a little quicker. So we're going to define depression. We're going to define symptoms. Connection between chronic stress and depression. Identify healthcare costs, because certainly these can amount to huge costs for industries. Identify intervention strategies for a company, but also on more of an individual basis. When it comes to depression, certainly a multitude of different causes for depression. Life experience can certainly trigger depression for some people. The effects of chronic stress would be where it's just going on and on and on, and there really isn't any respite from it. That can trigger depression for some people. Certainly there can be a genetic predisposition. I don't know, have they really found a gene yet for depression, or a combination of genes, I think, maybe? So, I mean, there's some markers there for it, but just because a person might have those doesn't mean it's going to be an issue for them. Something needs to trigger it off. Certainly lots of medical illnesses. What Aurora was doing through their care management program, when they had people that were being treated for a number of things, high blood pressure and diabetes and all this other kind of stuff, what they would do is they would make sure that those folks had ready access 24 hours a day to phone counseling, because of the recognition of how you're feeling, how you're doing, and how your illness is doing is so tight that Aurora wanted to make sure that they had that option for people going through care management. Personality factors, again, there can be that predisposition towards it. Depression versus blues. The clinical, and again, through EAP, and I think, Michael, you mentioned you have the EAP, and certainly the folks from Aurora do, county employees do. Through employee assistance, we never give a diagnosis. We have to certainly be alert to these kinds of things, but when somebody comes through the door, we're not pulling out the DSM-5 and saying, okay, you meet the criteria for major depression. Through EAP, that's just not at all what it's about. But if the person does have a clinical depression, it's an illness, lots of symptoms, it's persistent, certainly can result in suicide, and very often requires specific psychiatric treatment. The blues, anybody can be down, normal reactions. There might be one or two symptoms, very temporary, rarely suicidal, and usually you can get by with your support system. Who suffers from depression? Again, kind of that's, what the population looks like. Within a year, 10% of the adult Americans will have depression. I mean, that's regularly the case. The various studies out there show that it's that prevalent, that like 1 in 10. If we have 15 people in this room, 1.5 of you during the course of a year are likely to be significantly impacted by depression. That's how rampant it is. I think the antidepressant medications are, if they're not already, they're very close to being the #1 prescribed medication in the United States, above everything else, antidepressant medications, because it's so prevalent out there. Fewer than 50% of those suffering from depression seek treatment. 1 in 5 adults may experience a depression at some point in their life. Twice as many women as men experience it, although who's to say? Most guys aren't going to talk about it anyway. The tie between connection and various illness. I'm glad you're here, Michael. Let me tell you.
I just discovered there seems to be a imbalance demographically.
Well, we're glad you're here.
So am I.
I mean, you folks took a big chunk of your day to come in, so I really appreciate all you folks being here. With cancer, 25% dealing with depression, diabetes, 6% in that group, 10% in adults. Heart disease, 33, stroke, you can kind of read that. The good news, though, and really the highlight of that particular slide, is that the success rate for treatment of depression is fairly good at 80%. There's one or more methods that's likely to make a significant improvement. So, and when people come through and they're talking about, the depression kinds of symptoms, one of the things that I'm able to share with them is that the prognosis is darn good. I'll try something, you just flipped off the thing. That you know, anybody can end up having a problem, and I think that's because I dropped the power cord. We're good. We're good. We'll make it work. So when they come through the door, it's like, yep, anybody can be depressed, but the good news is that it's a very workable kind of diagnosis. And so we'll continue to work out till we find something that does it. Those of you who are nurses, you're going to do a better job with this whole kind of thing. But it really does, and actually, one of my coworkers, Michael Rups, is really responsible for that particular slide and really does illustrate how they're truly, with depression and stress, it is all in your head, but it's physically all in your head, okay? It's not just the negative mindset that the person is talking themselves down. There's truly some chemical kind of stuff going on, and that's what this illustrates. Stress and physical health claims, for those of you on that end of the spectrum. Individuals with depression have twice the health care expenditures than those non-depressed individuals. Individuals reporting significant stress have 70% or higher overall health care. Individuals reporting multiple social cycle symptoms had 147, at least in that study, 147% higher overall health costs. And so what happens is, I mean, that's costing the company, whoever the employer might be. Those are dollars that ideally could be going for something else instead of being caught with health care costs. Kaiser study, some of these studies, and I have to acknowledge that are fairly old, but again, just to kind of take it with a grain of salt, 90% of the 10 most common complaints in primary care have no organic basis. You can't do a CAT scan, you can't take an x-ray, you're not going to see physical evidence of it. There's no organic basis for it. It's something else that's going on with the person, whether depression or stress or something else. 10-year follow-up study found no organic conditions emerged to explain these complaints. Psychologically distressed individuals utilize health care, so again, the costs are lowest. 1/3 of employees absent from work, again, another cost, due to depression will be out for more than a month. Because once it gets hold, and if they don't get treatment, it can just kind of work its course with the individual. In 1990, depression was the 4th leading cause of disability worldwide. By 2020, which we're coming up on pretty quick, it's estimated that depression will be the 2nd leading cause of disability. So I mean, it's huge, which is so unfortunate because it is, for the most part, very treatable. 53% in the Merck survey believed return to work is more difficult following a psychiatric disability than after a physical disability. And from the EAP standpoint, very often we can be involved with the return to work kinds of meetings and help that person get reintegrated in a healthy kind of way back into the setting. Because it can certainly be very difficult. According to Bank One survey, 2nd leading cause of short-term disability events is depression. 2nd in total short-term disability days, longest average events. Costs. I have no idea how many zeros we're talking about in this stuff, but the costs are horrendous across the country. Signs of stress. Actually, this is kind of nice. So it gets into the muscle tension, rapid heartbeat, gastrointestinal. I'll give you a handout at this point, Cole, that I actually do use with the clients that come through. If you want to take like an extra copy or something, you're certainly welcome to, take a clean one along with your. So this one's a little bit more extensive than the one on the board. So on the top part of the sheet, does everybody get one? Okay. So acute stress symptoms, the top part really looks primarily at the physical symptoms. And nobody's going to have all of these things. First, I guess the starting point is first you rule out the medical illness kind of stuff. If there truly is no medical explanation for what's going on, then you want to fall back and start thinking, well, maybe this has to do with stress. And so if you start to see several of these showing up, it might be an indication that stress is at the heart of what's going on with the person. I know with the digestive, so the digestive problems, years ago, I had been called into a company where they had had an industrial accident. Some of the maintenance guys were welding on a huge glue tank, and they had a contractor from the outside that was on the project too. For whatever reason, the tank blew up, and the contracted guy was killed. The maintenance guys, for the most part, came out of it kind of unscathed. So that same day, I went in and I met with this fairly experienced, how would I say, worldly bunch of maintenance guys. And they said, oh yeah, you know, it's very unfortunate that this person was killed, but you know, it's part of the job, and you know, we're handling it fine. And so I thought, oh, that's good. You know, I told you about EAP, that's all I'm going to do. And so I came back 3 days later, and I was really impressed that one of these kind of hard, grizzled maintenance guys said, you know, Peter, my head didn't think I was having any kind of problems with this, but you know, I haven't had a BM in 3 days. And the results being that internally, it was taking a big toll on this guy, okay? His head wasn't in tune with it, but he was so bound up inside that it impacted something as basic as that kind of stuff. And so that's where, even if your head's not telling you that you're under stress, your body might be acting as kind of a biofeedback mechanism and give you a number of those kinds of warning signs. So you certainly want to pay heed to them. The bottom ones get into a little bit more on the emotional, intellectual symptom side of it. So again, you want to kind of pay attention to those things. Next one down, symptoms of depression. Persistent sadness, anxious, or an empty mood, feeling of hopelessness, pessimism, feelings of guilt, worthlessness, helplessness, loss of interest, or pleasure in hobbies and activities once enjoyed. And usually the way I'll phrase that is, has it been for 2 weeks or longer where you just couldn't get excited about anything? You just felt flat, down in the dumps, sad. And so that's kind of what I look at. Because again, it might be more of a blues kind of thing. It might be passing on its own. But if it's starting to get up to, you know, 2 weeks and just a number of these kinds of symptoms are showing up, that really supports that the person may truly be dealing with more than just the blues. Symptoms of depression, insomnia, early morning awaking or oversleeping. Sometimes, I talked about the sleep stuff, if a person is having difficulty falling asleep, usually, and you kind of hate to generalize, but usually difficulty falling asleep is more of an anxiety kind of issue versus a depression kind of thing. The person who eventually falls asleep, but then they wake up in the middle of the night and they can't fall back asleep for several hours or at all, that's really more indicative of a depression kind of issue. If that, for the person who's having trouble falling asleep, and again, not so much on the depression end, but if a person's having trouble falling asleep, they want to really look at their sleep dynamics so that it's dark, it's cool, it's quiet, it's kind of a real restful kind of setting, and they're ready to get in bed when their eyes start drooping, their head starts nodding, they start yawning, their body's telling them it's time to go to sleep, okay? That's usually a good time to get into bed. As opposed to, okay, it's now 11 o'clock and it's time for me to go to bed. Well, unfortunately, I just had a scoop of ice cream and coffee to go with it, and so my system may be all jacked up, and it may not be the best time to go to bed. Sometimes for people struggling to get to sleep, sometimes journaling is helpful. You know, for various things, for various people, various things work. the middle of the night kind of stuff, if the person does wake up in the middle of the night, they don't fall back asleep within 5 minutes, 10 minutes, the ideal is to get up and out of bed. Because you really want bed to be associated with being sound asleep. You don't want bed to be associated with tossing and turning. So if you don't fall back to sleep within 5-10 minutes, you want to get up, do something really boring, not something that's intellectually stimulating, and kind of wait for your body to start giving you that feedback that you're nodding off and getting tired again. Very often, appetite, weight issues. Sometimes people eat when they're depressed. Sometimes they eat when they're stressed too. Sometimes people don't. So it really goes the whole gamut regarding weight loss and appetite. For some people, they just really get in. So I guess the goal, the question we'll ask is, has there been a weight loss or gain of like 5 pounds or more without trying to do that? So there is a component for weight loss. Decreased energy, the person just kind of when I think of a very severe depression, I think of somebody who can't get out of bed. They've got the covers pretty much pulled over their head because they just truly can't stand any kind of stimulation at all. That's how severe the depression is. It just, any kind of stimulation just bothers the heck out of them. So it's just easier to stay in bed with the covers over their head. So that kind of gets into some of this stuff. Very often thoughts of death or suicide, restlessness, irritability, difficulty concentrating, remembering. So there is a strong cognitive piece. Very often excessive crying. Symptoms at work. Very often decreased productivity, morale issues, decreased team member skills, lack of cooperation because they're irritable, they're just not wanting to interact with any, social withdrawal, safety problems, making bad judgment calls because they're not thinking clearly, absenteeism, tardiness because they just don't feel comfortable being in the work setting, frequent complaints of fatigue because their body truly does just feel so drained, complaints of unexplained aches or pains, very common with depression, and then a lot of times a person might use alcohol or drugs to self-medicate. Risk factors for depression, kind of flipping back to some of that other stuff. Chronic stress, poor stress management, lack of social supports. Prior episodes are very often have been present. Family history, female postpartum depression. Types of depression, the major depression, dysthymia. Dysthymia is kind of where it lasts like 2 years or longer, just kind of flat for a very, very long time and not pulling out of it. Bipolar disorder is more, besides the flat down kinds of symptoms that were mentioned there, there's also some component of kind of a hyper, just where they'll go for like days, where they won't need to eat, they won't need to sleep. It's just the opposite of the depression, that kind of a simplistic view of the bipolar disorder. And then seasonal affective disorder tends to be kind of when the sun goes away and the cold weather comes, so kind of November through April around here is kind of the seasonal affective stuff. And again, even for all of these, the good news is there's a good range of treatments out there. Intervention strategies in the workplace, at least, helping, and we'll talk about these at length, helping the employee, supporting the supervisor, manager, and supporting the whole organization. For helping the employee, support stress management stuff because of that tie between stress and depression. So whatever you can do, and again, I don't know many companies that are saying, gee, we're going to feel comfortable pulling 50 employees off of the line to come in and hear a half-hour presentation on stress management. It just, or depression, or a lot of these topics. So to be creative, what we do through EAP is, within the last year or so, we've been doing quite a bit in the way of just table tents and stuff. So you can kind of take a particular topic, do a nice little quick blurb on it, symptoms and how to deal with it, and to call the EAP. We do email promos, so those folks that are on the email kind of system, they can get out, try to do the posters on these kinds of topics. Education about depression, because I've been involved where we've scheduled employee meetings regarding depression. You don't, I mean, who wants to show up for that? I mean, just not a real exciting topic. Certainly can do it if the workplace is interested. Intervening with the employee, review any work performance issues. You got to do that. You got to pay attention to the work performance. Describe the employee's value to the organization, and this is when you're meeting with them privately. You might want to have another HR person, supervisor with you, so it's not just one-on-one. But this is the kind of stuff that you, when meeting with them, what you go over. Express hope for the employee, and then if you have an EAP, certainly refer to EAP. And I do have I've got a reference for the county resources if you don't have an employee assistance. So again, that's specifically for working with the employee if you have some concerns. When referring to the Employee Assistance Program, the Employee Assistance Program will do a broad-based psychological assessment. We'll work on problem solving to identify where they're at and what the next step is. If it's beyond the scope of EAP, we'll talk about in-network treatment providers, and we'll follow up to make sure they got connected. So that's kind of the EAP part of it. Supporting the supervisor. In that, I think companies are more willing to pull supervisors in for a particular topic like depression or stress management. And so we're always happy to do the education component. Coaching, and at least with the Aurora EAP, 24/7, supervisors, HR people, managers can call up 24/7 and talk with one of the account executives, okay? It's certainly the employees and their families can call in 24/7, but that's a different line altogether. They're calling in and they're talking with a licensed professional counselor. What this is all about is admin, HR, they can call in and ask to speak to an account executive and just process what's going on there and then. So if it's like, I'm picking up on something, but I'm not sure what it is, if you have your EAP, give them a call and just kind of consult with the account executive. Job accommodation, we'll talk about, there's another slide on that. Return to work support, addressing the employee's ability to function and relationships. So with the back to work meeting gets a lot of that kind of stuff. And if needed, with our system, again, you can make a formal referral where the company wants person seen, we'll have them sign a release and we can give you feedback that yes, they can. Fostering positive relationships. Supervisor role and responsibility. It is the supervisor's role and responsibility to promote as much as possible positive relationship with the effective employee. And that can be tough to do. If they're real irritable, they're kind of withdrawing, that can be a real challenge to try to keep the lines of communication open. While you're still respecting privacy and confidentiality, the supervisor does not know any specifics, or if other employees ask questions about it, so you don't want to be sharing inappropriately. You can certainly talk to other supervisors or managers or HR, but again, you have to be cautious on who you confide in. Examples of actual job accommodations. The employee's been off for a while, whether it's for an illness with some depression or primarily with depression. Sometimes coming back in half-time for several weeks. The ability to use Family Medical Leave Act on a non-continuous basis. As they feel the need, they can dip into it. Support for concentration deficit, because with depression, even though the person may be starting to get back on track, there still is that cognitive deterioration kind of, where they're just not hitting on all cylinders. So allow for frequent breaks, divide small assignments into smaller tasks, and allow the use of headset. For some of them, calming music is really soothing and realistic in some work settings. Support for memory deficits, because the person is again not tracking. Allow the employee to tape record meetings if necessary. Additional training, provide checklists. So there's various things to be creative to support the person. We value them as an employee. We want it to be a win-win situation for them and the company. So being creative to come up with what's going to be the most helpful to get them back to full efficiency on the job. This is kind of a quick blurb. Actually, I have to apologize. When I combined a couple of these slides, this one's still looking pretty good, but some of these get a little challenging. Employee assistance program. So who in here does, everybody has EAP, kind of? I mean, because it's been around a long time, so I'm kind of preaching to the choir, so I'm not, okay. I'll buzz through these. I guess the main thing to highlight is it's for the employee, it's for their significant others, it's free of charge, it's high quality stuff, it's available, readily available, you know, just call in to get it rolling. Okay. Most EAPs do the work-life kind of thing where they contract for specialized knowledge and resource people regarding child care, elder care issues, legal issues, financial issues. Topics for EAP, that kind of stuff. Issues that may affect job performance. Very appropriate for EAP, balancing home and work, alcohol, drug issues, financial, child care. EAPs will do the assessment and then okay. How is, this is as far as, can I read that one? Who may need EAP? How is your organization may be in a situation where they need some kind of consultation regarding person's job performance, safety practices, interpersonal relationships, cooperation among teams. That's all very appropriate through employee assistance programs. Signs of problematic stuff in the workplace. Again, this kind of reflects a lot of the stuff that the individual one did. Again, you kind of not going to read those to you. Supervisory referral. You notice a work performance decline, attendance, tardiness, productivity, accuracy. The other thing that doesn't get listed there is so often we get supervisory referrals where the person is technically their skills are great and wonderful. Couldn't be a better employee regarding their technical skills. Actually, I just had one recently. What doesn't show up on there is the people part of it. 80% of the time that people leave a position has to do with people stuff, not technical skills. Okay. So we can be a resource regarding helping them play better with the rest of the kids in the playground. Okay. So although it doesn't show up there, that's part of why we get a lot of supervisory referrals. Certainly, if the employee is reporting suicidal thoughts, kind of stuff. Contact human resources, contact county executive, meet with the employee. Supporting the organization, do the educational thing regarding depression, stress management, early intervention, integration of benefits across the line as much as possible. Care management, cost containment, because that's what the company's all about, is they got to make money. And then policy development. Again, EAPs, whatever you're interested in, EAP can be a resource to help you with that stuff. Depression and legal issues, just kind of references the Americans with Disability Act, Family Medical Leave Act, workers' compensation. Other resources, the one that for locally, if you run into a situation, especially like something where well, you have the EAP, so you always have the numbers, and that's great and wonderful. So you can call your EAP. If there were any of you here who really didn't have that resource, as far as Manitowoc goes, the county, through Human Services, does have an after-hours number where it goes to a phone service, they process what's going on, kind of identify what's going to be the most helpful. Even to the extent if somebody's at a place where they really truly might need to be seen after hours, they can even facilitate that kind of stuff. Okay. So I mean, there are resources, and I'll give you again, call your EAP first if for some reason, say that you run across somebody and it's not work related. So you probably, well, you could still call it. You should still call EAP. But as far as Manitowoc County, the after hours number is 920. and actually I just got this, so it didn't show up on your PowerPoint, and I apologize, but I just confirmed this yesterday. So it's 920-323-2448 and 920-323-2448. So again, if you run into a situation where, gee, person's very depressed, they're just overwhelmed by stress, for some reason EAP is not going to be appropriate, that would be the local resource then to call.
And what are they called?
Well, that's really provided by your county taxpayer dollars. It's Manitowoc County Human Services. Well, actually, good point. Because what it's going to say, or at least the way it was explained to me, is the service they use after hours provides that service for a number of different counties. So they're going to answer the phone as Northwest Connect. But it's still the right place. It's still the county-sponsored crisis service, evenings, weekends, holidays, kind of stuff. So they'll answer at Northwest Connect. So thank you for reminding me of that. Okay, for more information, contact me. What I'll do is I'll put out, or I'll pass around EAP stuff, and I'll have a contact number for either myself, one of the account executives, or Steve Wagner. Steve is our business development person. Okay, now we're going to get into the personalized stuff, which is, so on this stuff, before we shift gears and look at how you're doing with stress management, out of that stuff, anything that I should be expanding on or trying to hear more about? Okay, we're going to get into the extra good stuff. So I gave you the acute stress handout already. Now, when I started in EAP in 1989, one of my coworkers was a wonderful man by the name of Roger Vandenbush. And Roger gave me the typology, or whatever we're going to call it, on the bottom of this thing.
Thank you.
Roger gave me the stress options, and he said, Peter, I really encourage you to improve upon that stress management model. And so what? If he gave it to me in '89, and now we're, what, 30-some years later? 20 years? 30-some years later. I have been able to improve on it. And I mean, I see lots of stressed people, work with lots of stressed people. What this is saying is, if you have a stressful situation, whether it's my grandchildren, my job, my wife, my health, my financial situation, regardless of where the stress is coming from, when you really come down to it, you do not have unlimited options. Be nice, we all like choices, so you have some choices, but they're maybe not as expansive as you might think they are. So what Roger was saying is, in some situations, some stressful kinds of things are very appropriate to be avoided. Over the years, I've worked with 3 people who had a lot of those acute stress symptoms. Okay? It was just, the stress that they were experiencing was just eating them up alive. Okay? And while I still worked with them, they quit their job, and the day they stopped walking through the door of work, their stress symptoms started to go away. They had to pay their bills, they had to find a new job, but the day one of them was a police officer in a small town. Every time he had to make a traffic stop, his stress symptoms would go through the roof because he knew he was going to be gunned down by whoever was in that vehicle in front of him. Another was a bookkeeper in a small company who was being pressured to do some unethical things with the books. And the third person was a nurse who worked for a doctor who was not a very nice man at all. And for them, it was truly an option to avoid the stress. The day they stopped walking through the door of work, their stress symptoms started to go away. Okay? So sometimes, I mean, with my grandchildren, it's not going to work. Can't avoid my grandchildren, okay? And I think about that because they're coming over tonight, they're coming over tomorrow night. One of them is 3, and one of them is 6, and one of them is 9. So it's kind of playing on my mind. Okay, so if you really can't avoid the stress, and that's fine, sometimes you can alter the stress. So the first place that I had worked doing employee assistance services, I ended up doing what was called managed mental health care. And so that was a very enjoyable kind of job initially, where I would help people navigate through the insurance end of things to make sure that they were receiving the appropriate mental health kind of services. But eventually, as companies tightened up and insurance companies tightened up, the whole job was just telling people no all day long. I'm sorry, Michael, you didn't go through the right hoops. Now you're going to have to pay $15,000 for that inpatient stay because you didn't call us first. Sorry, Michael, that's it. And so that wasn't a real fun job after a while. So I went back to my boss and I said, boss, I don't mind doing this managed care stuff part of the time, but I really need to go back to counseling to counterbalance all day telling no to people, and that they kind of dropped the ball. So he was accommodating for that. So sometimes, depending on what the stress is, sometimes you can be creative, talk with family, talk with friends, talk with who's ever out there, counselors, clergies, whatever. You can do some brainstorming that might help to reduce at least some of the stress for a while. Okay. Sometimes you can't avoid it. Sometimes you've done all you can to reduce the stress. By default, for the near future, you're stuck with the third one, which is for the near future, you have to accept what you can't get away from and you can't reduce any further, okay? And part of the reason why I say for the near future is I'm old enough to recognize that it all changes. Whether it's my grandchildren, my wife, my health, my financial situation, my job, I'm here to tell you, it's all going to change. It's just a question of how soon. So if there's stress coming from a particular area, I guarantee that eventually a big change is going to come. And that hopefully would be a benefit to you. So the good news is, though, if you're stuck with, for the foreseeable future, accepting what you really can't get away from right now, the good news is there's some things that would help you bear up better, longer, and in a more healthy manner while you're in this holding pattern, waiting for that next humongous change to come along. And that's where we get into the quiz, and it's going to check to see what you are. And I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you with 3 of these questions because they're reverse scored. Again, if you want to take extras for those on the home front, certainly feel free to do that. Does anybody need a pen? Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to coach you on 3 of these things. On number 6, if you don't smoke, you don't use any kind of nicotine products whatsoever at the present time, give yourself a 1. If no nicotine products. Number 7, if you really abstain completely from alcohol, that would be a 1 on the 7th question. If you have 1 or 2 drinks a week, that's probably getting up to be a 2. You have 3 or 4 drinks a week, that's probably getting to be like a 3, so accordingly. And then last but not least, as far as my coaching, number 19 gets into whether you're doing much in the way of caffeine. So whether it's coffee or tea or medication with caffeine in it or chocolate like I do. So number 19 looks at how much caffeine you might be putting in your system. If you don't do any caffeine to speak of, you give yourself a 1. If you give yourself, a little bit of caffeine. Okay. All right, so the other ones are straightforward. There's a range of options at the top. I eat at least 1 hot balanced meal a day. If it's always, give yourself a 1. If it's never, give yourself a 5, or you can split the difference. extra copies of these, so if you want a blank copy, I'm more than happy to give you some. So feel free to. So when you're all done, go ahead and total them all up. Looks like people are pretty much done. If you did happen to read the bottom part of it, it does say once you've totaled it up, you get to subtract 20, okay? And then once you've subtracted 20 from your initial total, the goal is to be as low of a number as possible. So, and this goes back quite a few years. I was, you know, and I really take this stuff very seriously, and so I tend to really have a good score on this thing usually. So I was down at a nursing home that we provide employee assistance for in Sheboygan a number of years ago, and so there was like 90 people in the room, and I said, gee, you know, I always have a really good score in here, so who thinks they have a really good score? And this little old lady next to me says, I had a 3.
A 3.
Beat me, lady. So I mean, that kind of set the tone as far as somebody being able to pull off a 3. I mean, that was the new standard. So anybody blessed enough to be able to have a 3 or less?
That's like the first number, right?
For most of us, yeah, I couldn't believe it that she had a 3. It's like she set the new standard for us. So again, the goal would be, you're okay, you know, once your score is getting up to around 30, it's still not a big deal, but it's saying maybe there is some room for improvement. Once your score is getting more up to like 50, the handwriting is definitely on the wall that you really want to address positive coping skills, and that's what the next 2 handouts are going to do. And 75 is actually life-threatening kind of stuff. It really is. That if you score a 75 on this thing, because what tends to happen is for each one of us, we tend to have one system, whether it's the gastrointestinal or the skeletal system or the muscular system or the nervous system or whatever. One of our systems tends to be a little bit more vulnerable than the other one. Okay? If you're not taking care of your stress, likely what's going to happen is whatever that system is for you is eventually going to blow out on you. And if it ends up being a circulatory system or something, this stuff could certainly be, or your risk for cancer just goes through the roof if you're not taking care of yourself regarding stress management. So stress really certainly can be a killer. But the good news is now you know where you are on that continuum from a wonderful low score to a 75, which is not a place you want to be at all. Okay, so out of that, the next slide kind of illustrates, or it shows where those 20 questions were taken from. And now I see a bunch of little grandchildren outside just lining up, and it's like, oh, the good news is I don't have 30 of them coming to my house. I only have 3 of them coming to my house. So it's all relative. And that's part of the positive stress management. Okay, the whole mental piece is very relevant for stress management. Okay, So out of the 20 questions you just answered, there was one question that did have to do with spiritual, okay? And I wish it would have been, maybe I should, I don't have the copyright on this, so I really can't fool around with it too much. But when I see people, what I ask them, when it comes to the spiritual part of it, I say, gee, for some people, having a particular group that they fellowship, worship with, hang out with, can be really helpful when stress is really at its peak, okay? A whole separate group of people that has nothing to do with the worship part, for a lot of people that have some kind of spiritual belief that leads to daily prayer or meditation time, for a lot of people that can be really helpful. So I'll ask people, you know, where do you sit on that? You know, are either of those or both of those a resource for you? So I'm not here to proselytize, but the research regularly shows that people that are doing good on either or both of those fronts just last better and longer under stress management. So that's enough said on that. 9 of the 20 questions were really drawn from that physical category. Obviously, the nutritional part of it, how you're sleeping, whether you're getting exercise, what you're putting into your body with those 3 on alcohol. So it's kind of strongly biased towards the physical end of the spectrum. There was one question that got into the mental side of it, and it asked about how organized you tend to be. And we'll come back to the mental part in just a little bit. Diversions gets into whether you do something fun at least once a week. Okay? So, and diversions can be a wide range of different possibilities. Most of us would think of doing fun stuff away from work as a diversion, and that helps to re-energize yourself and charge your batteries. This goes back probably 4 or 5 years ago. I had a woman come in who was working 100 hours a week. She had 2 full-time jobs as a home health aide, and on the weekend she had a part-time job. So she was working 20 hours on a weekend as a home health aide. And the reason she was doing that is because she had an alcoholic husband who didn't really much want her around at all. So by going out as a home health aide, those folks loved her dearly. So that helped to re-energize her. It also threw some money her way, which was great, and it gave her an excuse to not be hanging out with her alcoholic husband. So for her, 100 hours a week of work was a diversion. I wouldn't have thought of that, but for some people. So the goal under the diversion is to find something that just re-energizes you, charges you up, and gives you hopefully a break from whatever that kind of stressful stuff is that's going on in your life. And then the remaining 2 obviously get into the family and interpersonal categories and stuff. The last one I'll give you takes, well, actually, before we go on, so on the left-hand column, there does happen to be something called negative copers, okay? So just for yourself, you don't have to check them off, but take a couple of seconds and go down that line of negative coping mechanisms just to see if you find yourself ever sliding into indulging, that's really overindulging, revenge, tantrums, fault finding, worrying, denial, illness, tobacco, withdrawal, alcohol, eating, gambling, internet use, pornography, drugs, passivity, stubbornness. So it's human nature to have, maybe 1 or 2 of those things that the person might slide into as a way to deal with stress. The main goal here is to you don't want to get stuck with the negative coping skills, because those things are going to snowball and they're going to become a stressor in and of themselves, which is then just going to add to the load that you're carrying. So it's like, okay, you know, maybe I've got a buddy of mine who, with his doctor's blessing, instead of drinking alcohol, he'll go outside and he'll have a cigarette. So for him, tobacco use, nicotine use, is a positive coping skill, okay? So it's used in reason, I guess. You know, if the alternative is getting drunk and crashing your car and killing somebody else, for him, with his doctor's blessing, the cigarette smoking is better. So you don't want to, the only message is you don't want to get stuck with the negative coping skills. You want to keep going into that good stuff that you got going on. So the last one then that I'll give you is it takes each one of those from the coping chart and just elaborates on what it's kind of talking about. So if your score was 30 or above, the ideal would be that you would find either something to get back into that used to be a positive coping skill for you. Because a lot of times people come in, and I remember one guy who said, you know, I used to play the piano, but I don't play the piano anymore. It's like, gee, maybe that could be part of your stress management plan. Another person came through and they said, I used to listen to classical music on public broadcasting, and I don't do that anymore. So it's like, okay, that could be a small piece. The other thing that I'll put in, you know, under that physical kind of thing, the research is so strong. The connection between exercise and not only stress management, but also depression management. For the majority of people, exercise has been proven to be as effective as medication. So just a word to, you don't want, you know, I regularly talk with people about, gee, you know, if you're dealing with a lot of stress, I understand that, if you're dealing with a mild to moderate level of depression, what are you doing for exercise? I remember one psychologist over in Stevens Point, the more often his patients were exercising, the more often he'd see it. That's just the long and the short of it. If you're willing to put in the time and effort, and again, if they're severely depressed, obviously that's unrealistic, but moderate or severe, I mean, minimal to moderate depression, you know, you go ahead and say, I'm going to just exercise for 5 minutes, and maybe you'll feel like doing a 10. And it's just a proven option. The last thing I wanted to talk about was back on our stress options chart. The top part, the only reason that triangle's there at the top is just to reflect on how there's just a super strong connection between how a person's feeling, okay, what their mental self-talk is all about, and their behavior. That's what the triangle at the top is all about. If you flip to the bottom part of that sheet, where it talks about, okay, you couldn't avoid the stress, you've done all you can to reduce the stress, so for the near future, you have to just tough it out. So you're going to take care of all these positive coping skills, spiritual, mental, family, social, diversion, physical. Really kind of under the mental part of it is that whole line of cognitive therapy that's really been in vogue probably since the 70s. 50s and 60s, the Rogerian counseling was kind of like, come on in, we'll help you identify your feelings, you'll talk out your feelings, and you'll end up feeling better and functioning better, and that worked out fine. But then, like Aaron Beck and David Burns and some other folks came along, and they really started pushing, let's not worry so much about the feelings, let's worry more about what the person's telling themselves in their head. Because to a large extent, that's where the feelings come from. So if the person's not feeling the way they want to feel, by changing that mental self-talk, they can, in essence, kind of talk themselves up again. Okay? So the other piece of it, change your belief about the stressful situation. So, you know, it's not the fact that my 3 grandchildren are coming over tonight. That's the reality of it. That's not the part that's causing the stress, because my wife is there and my sister's visiting, and they're experiencing the same 3 children, but they're not stressed out about it, okay? So it's the same triggering event but it's not causing them any stress at all because they love children and they love all the hecticness and all the turmoil and all this kind of stuff. For me, the mental self-talk is, oh man, they're going to want to use my computer. They're going to want to dance in the living room. They're going to knock over my large screen TV. And they're going to want to have something to eat that we're not having tonight. So that's the mental self-talk up here. It's not the 3 children doing it. It's what Peter's telling himself about it that causes the stress. So if I pay attention to this and I change the mental self-talk, I can just cruise right along with it the same way my wife and my sister does. So that's where the plug comes in. And this isn't new stuff. Philosophers, centuries ago, had already figured out it's not the situation that causes the stress. It's what you tell yourself in your head about it. I'll give you one last example. A young lady, a medical example actually, a young lady in De Pere had ended up in the Med-Surg hospital because she made an incredibly lethal suicide attempt. Okay? That certainly can happen. The reason she made this incredibly lethal suicide attempt was because she got a B in one of her high school classes. When I went to Manitowoc Lincoln, I don't think I ever saw a B, and I wasn't suicidal over it, okay? And I guarantee there were many other students in that same class that received a B who weren't suicidal over it. But in her mind, it's like, okay, this B means I'm a failure. I'm a loser. I'm not going to get into the college of my choice. I'm not going to get into the career field of my choice. And so I might as well be dead. If she would have expressed that to anybody, you know, any school personnel, from the janitorial staff to the principal to anybody, if she would have expressed that even to one of her friends, they would have helped her realign the message. 3.99999 is probably still going to get you into the school of your choice. It's probably still going to get you into the career field of your choice. It doesn't mean you have to really kill yourself over it. But she didn't do that. She didn't talk about it. She went with what that mental self message was. You're a loser, you fell short, you deserve to die, and she acted on it. So that just really illustrates how important that mental self-talk can be when it comes to dealing with a difficult situation. You know, certainly that's where the social and the family part. Talk it over with somebody. Get some input from somebody else, especially the kids about you. Okay, the last thing I have for you while I ask about, and I field questions, Aurora is being very good about cost containment. Those of you who have been with Aurora long enough know that they used to have a box behind home plate in Miller Park. Those days are gone. Aurora's tightening the belt. The box is gone. I won't be going to any more games in the box seat at Miller Park. But as the good news would have it, my friends at the Wisconsin Council on Problem Gambling give me all sorts of good stuff to share with people when I go out, because that's their mission, is to get their name and number out there. So in here, and I'll pass it around, certainly their flyer is in here, and on the flyer it's got 20 questions, just in case the person might think, gee, do I have a problem with gambling? 20 questions will answer it. But then we have, this would be a pencil sharpener. This would be kind of spring clip thing with a light on it. Certainly lots of these ruler things, emery boards. I think I might even have in here a key ring, a tape measure. I think that's good stuff. So I'll just, so please help yourself. So again, just a little thank you for coming in and spending your lunch hour. Okay, so that's out of the way. You're getting your free stuff. That's good. Okay, so what do you disagree with that we can talk about? Come on. I've been lecturing all this time. There's got to be something that tripped your trigger.
I think it's hard to, you know, they get a couple visits with EAP, and then if they need more assistance, they need to get referred on. And that's where the difficulty comes in. sometimes you have to wait
Yeah.
quite a while to get that appointment with another
And
mental health
I
professional.
have the perfect response for that, Judy,
Yeah.
is the company needs to get off their duff and spend more money for the 8-session model, which some of our companies do. So it's not a slam dunk that EAP does. When I started in '89, we didn't do any phone work at all, okay? If somebody called EAP, it was to schedule an appointment and walk through the door. We saw them one time and we referred them out. So the good news is from '89 till now, many EAPs do a minimum of 3 sessions. The place I used to work for before Aurora EAP, all of our contracts were 8-session models. And nationally, for outpatient counseling, the national average for outpatient number of sessions is 6 sessions. So if through EAP you're getting 6 sessions or 8 sessions, you're right up there. So it's not Aurora's EAP saying, let's cap it out at 3 sessions. What'll happen is, just between you and me, so because nobody tracks my number of sessions. So somebody comes in and they say, Peter, this is what's going on, and it looks like 2 or 3 sessions are going to do it, and I have to do a 4th session. Nobody's going to care. So I've got a little bit of flexibility within that 3-session model. But again, many companies go with a 6-session or an 8-session model, and we wish they would. The place I worked with before, that's all they would say. But the other thing is we try to do a warm transfer. Is like, okay, if this has been helpful to you, yes, it's going to cost you deductible and copay and stuff, but we're going to try to get you to the right place so you don't have to go shopping around and pass the baton and give enough to help you keep going and stuff. So thank you very much. What other questions or concerns? Oh, thank you, Stacy. What do you got?
I have a question. When I was looking over some of your handouts, which I think are very helpful, by the way, one of the things that kind of jumped out to me was how do poor people, that sometimes struggle with addiction, they struggle with life planning, not necessarily having those skills, not necessarily having correct nourishment because they can't, afford the, good food and things like that, and self-care, and as a result of the financial stressor in their life, maybe don't have as much relaxation as they should. What kind of resources, maybe they are only able to obtain part-time employment or
I hear you.
don't really get, EAP benefits. What kind of benefits are there for people in those situations?
Excellent question, and it really did trigger part of what I should have plugged is the good news is that Manitowoc County has the 211 information and referral line. So for all the stuff you talked about, it's very appropriate for those families to call in and see what's available in Manitowoc County. In the old days, it used to be United Way, always maintain these listings of who is doing what. So you just contact United Way. Well, that's gotten more formalized, and in many counties in Wisconsin, there's a 211 resource that's up and running. So it's only a phone call away to see what assistance is out there. The other thing, again, just kind of the side part of it. So the Crisis Intervention Center that I worked in the 80s, everybody would come to the Crisis Center for just the kind of stuff you're talking about. Not only did we do phone counseling, we saw people, it was all free of charge, so they could walk through the door. Manitowoc used to have a similar kind of service. Actually, the Brown County Crisis Center back in the 80s provided that service for Manitowoc County. It was contracted. So people would call a Manitowoc number, they would get through to us, we would process over the phone what's going on, what they need, and refer them to the appropriate place. And if they needed to be seen because of the severity of what was going on, there was some face-to-face counsel issue that we could activate. That's what I asked them about when I called Human Services, and they said, well, it's not quite that formalized like it used to be, but they still have that after-hours number for the real crisis kind of stuff. So again, I guess my recommendation would be 211 as a starting point, whether it's food, shelter, even counseling, because a lot of places get supported by United Way dollars, and so at least partway through the year, they can do sliding fee scale kind of stuff. You know, if they've got access to veteran services because they're a veteran, that might open up some doors. Title 19, that can open up some doors. And I would think that once the whole Obamacare thing gets rolling, that because of the mental health parity law that went in 2010, I would think that everybody that gets insurance has some access. You know, they're going to still have to deal with deductibles and copays, yes. But there's in every insurance plan, if the person can get into it, there's definitely money for counseling stuff.
Okay.
So thanks for asking so I could plug 211, which is great, Manitowoc has. What other questions? Otherwise, the clock on the wall is getting close to 1 o'clock. And again, I really appreciate you all being here, and thank you for coming out. And hopefully, so is this kind of the stuff you were looking for?
Yeah, very good.
Okay, good. If you do have any, that's right, the EAP stuff. I gotta
Do you have any more?
EAP stuff. Pardon?
Do you have any more? How vulnerable are you?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
So,
you're hoarding them over.
She has a whole stack. It's like a ring.
Here's the EAP brochure that we use, just so you can kind of see what it looks like. I'll put it over here on the counter. And then this thing, you've already got EAP, so this one's probably not going to be very relevant. But this talks about kind of what the Aurora EAP is all about. There's a couple of sheets in that. But the good news is, and again, the EAP concept is just really great. It started probably, its early underpinning started back in the 40s. Northeast Wisconsin into the 70s and 80s, EAP really came into its own. So now, boy, I mean, I'm an account executive. Besides doing the face-to-face and the phone stuff, I'm an account executive for 43 different companies. My biggest one is Lakeside Foods, which has like 900 employees. I've got a couple of companies that are like 3-4 people, but they're still paying because they value what EAP can bring to the mix. So I mean, it really does run that whole gamut. It's no longer, it used to be just the large companies had internal EAPs, then eventually it made more sense to contract for the service, so then, then the mid-sized ones again, and now, boy, across the board, just about everybody has, hopefully. And I was surprised when the economic downturn came. I thought a bunch of companies, the first thing they would cut would be the EAPs. That didn't happen. What happened was, well, Lakeside's a good example. They used to have over 1,000 employees. Now, because of just tightening up on stuff, now they've got 800 some. And so a lot of our companies cut down on the number of employees they had, but they're still in existence and they still valued employee assistance enough to keep that. And it's, the money for EAP is so small of a percent, but the benefit, if the company is using the whole thing, consultation, supervisory referrals, and crisis response stuff, and the direct service to the families and the individuals and stuff, if they use the whole thing, they're getting so much of a return on their dollar amount that, from our standpoint, it just makes good sense. So we lost a couple to what's called free 800 number EAPs, but not many at all like I thought. Once the economic downturn came, I thought, we're going to be, because I think we started with I think we used to have like 330 companies that across the board we provided services for, and I think we're down like 305 or something, so still have lots of them. Okay, so I don't want to keep you over at school here, but thank you for coming out, and if you do run across, if you have any questions, feel free to call me. The 800 number, they'll know how to get a hold of me if they want to get in touch with me. Thank you. And everybody, you got the handout that you're looking for?
You'll have to do it again.